I think I've met most of you before, so we're part of a big group, Loch Associates Group. You've got some information on your desks about us. So we are not only, I'm an employment solicitor, but we're also HR consultants. And we also have Loch Health, and you've also got some training information about some of the training we're doing. So do have a look, because particularly the sort of mental health, first aid type things are really big at the moment. So we do have a bit of crossover on our slides we were talking about. So I did get the slides just before ours came out, but my view was actually keep each set of slides complete, because then you can take it away and decide what you're going to do with it. So I will skip through quite fast some of my stuff. And also, I think I'm very conscious, obviously, that a lot of you are professionals, years of experience, and you will have come across a lot of this before. So stop me if I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs or trying to. So this is what you've got on your desk, a little bit of information about us as a group. So again, we looked at statistics, and we've got a record high employment rate at the moment, which is great all round. But couple that with increased life expectancy, and having sort of these complex intergenerational workforces, then you're brewing a perfect storm, I think. So increase in employment for women, we were talking about earlier on, a lot of that is to do with changes in state pension age, and also because, of course, not many people now have these lovely final salary pensions anymore. People are living longer, they need to work longer. Traditionalists and the baby boomers, most complex to manage. So we've been through the characteristics, stereotypical characteristics. We're not meant to stereotype, but I do think it's quite interesting to look at what's out there. So what we've done is we've actually sort of taken a number of the tables and selected some of the information that we quite like. But I think, key things, Generation Z, high expectations, Generation Y, entitled. Generation X, cautious. Baby boomers, less collaborative. And then finally you've got the traditionalists set in their ways. So I do think there's some key sort of, key underlying information there that is absolutely true. ACAS have got some really good guidance on age discrimination, so I'm going to come on to that a bit later, but I quite like their top 10 obligations. Don't make age-based assumptions on what job applicants and employees are capable of and how they will behave. Stereotyping is one of the most likely causes of age discrimination. So although it's helpful to have this sort of information to kind of understand, don't use it to stereotype. So then we've also got a graph, and I was joking with Anna that this is an example of generational diversity in our business. On your slides, it's impossible to read, particularly if you need glasses. So at the back, you'll find attached a separate version of the slide, which is much bigger. Because I said, I can't read that without the bright light and magnifying glass, and Anna was looking at it and going, what's she going on about? I think these statistics are really key as well. So as we talked about, employment's increasing across it generally. But 50 to 64-year-olds up 184,000, striking statistics, so they're the ones that are sitting at the very top, they're the highest rise. And in addition, 25 to 34-year-olds are up 136,000. Annual employment increase, largely driven by those 25 years and over. And that might fit a little bit with the sort of, below that age group, everyone's a lot more flexible, they're making different choices. You get to 25, you're beginning to settle down, and also, the older generation is needing to work longer. There are opportunities. It's not just a challenge. And we've touched on quite a lot of that. Sharing knowledge, wisdom, collaboration, respectfully engaged workforce, and there is a wealth of experience in the ageing workforce as well. But the challenges that we talked about is how do we balance people's needs, how do we recruit successfully, how do we appropriate remuneration, but it's not just remuneration, it's retention strategies as well. How do we keep people in employment, and what do we offer in the way of training, benefits, and working patterns? You about to say something? No? You look like you are.
Oh no, sorry.
So one of our thoughts is get to know your workforce. We actually use, within our own business, a thing called Office Vibe, which is really a really nice, informal, sort of regularly pops up on your inbox. every 2, 3, 4 weeks, random questions about whether you feel valued, whether you feel respected, whether your peers are supportive enough, etc., etc. But also what it's enabled our HR team is to understand what it is that we value, what it is that we expect, what it is that perhaps is not being delivered to the extent that we'd like it. And that's across the workforce. Everyone's asking the same random questions, and you can't get away with not answering them. But I think that's really, really a really good thing to do. Training we've talked about, so managers, I think someone touched on up there, it's the management team who've got to adapt. The management team have got to understand that actually you're not dealing with the workforce that you used to have. The management team may well be the older generation, and they need to be trained to understand that and how to adapt and how to get the most out of it. Just moving on, legislation. Couldn't come up with much actually, you'll be pleased to know. So Equality Act obviously is the key one. Direct, indirect discrimination, harassment, victimisation, and also discrimination by association as well. You shouldn't forget. Obviously it covers more than employees as well. Employment Rights Act, we looked at flexible working as well. Flexible working regulations obviously quite key. And then in terms of all the other information, as I said, there's quite a lot of useful information. The AHRC Code of Practice, I think, is brilliant on all sorts of employment-related issues. There's an ACAS guide on age discrimination in the workplace. The Age of the Workplace, the second guide, is archived, but you can still get it. And then, as I said, there's these very nice top 10 obligations and also top 10 myths about age, which I quite like from ACAS, and I've got a couple of those I was going to share later. So there's a wealth of information out there. If we're looking at what happens if it all goes horribly wrong, and the level of...
Sorry, I had a spider attack.
The level of awards, I think the dip in 2017-18 is probably as a result of employment tribunal fees. But you'll see mean awards for age discrimination are at 26,000. Off the top of my head, I think that's higher than sex discrimination mean awards, so it's quite significant, I think. We've then gone through sort of, categorising different workers. So older workers, what are the key issues? Poor health, disability as workers age, impact on performance, potentially, but not always. So we have had, for example, it does depend on the job you're doing. We've been working with funeral directors. One of the pallbearers is too old to lift, carry his weight in the coffin. How do you deal with that? All the other pallbearers are complaining. It's not fair that he should get away with sort of, just not doing much. Default retirement ages were removed, so now people are no longer automatically retiring. You've got to manage capability, potentially. And that's where that becomes really important, the capability policy.
So out of interest, how do you address something like that?
It will be capability, so you'd be doing a capability process. So obviously one of the first things we look at is whether there's any underlying health issue that we need to be aware of if it's potential disability.
And if there's not, and I'm afraid it's just
Yeah, so you'd then be perhaps looking to see whether there is an alternative role for them that you can put them into, and if that's not possible, then you would ultimately be terminating employment for capability. But you do need to have a good process. You've got to have a good, because he's not going to go at the age of, I think he's 70 actually. Obviously, he could stay forever, but in terms of the sort of the entire business, that's not going to work.
Just on that, you did find alternative employment, but it wasn't at the same rate.
Yeah.
And you could say,
well,
but it's actually got to be 10 grand less.
Yeah, it would go to the fairness of a dismissal. So if ultimately he said, no, not doing it, you've then got we've done everything we possibly could in order to avoid dismissing this individual, and this is one of the things we did. We offered a job, yes, it's at a lower rate. We didn't say, you're out because you can't carry a coffin anymore. We looked at every possible opportunity that we had in the business. It's really valuable, I think, to actually offer something if you have got something, even if, underlying it, probably they're not going to accept it. They might think it's beneath them. One of the ACAS myths I quite liked was, actually picking that out, was the, can we talk to people about what their long-term career plans are? Talking to employees over 50 about their future work plan risks employers being accused of age discrimination. Well, yes, if you ask just the over 50-year-olds, but ask everybody what their long-term career plans are. So what are their short, medium, long-term plans? Don't design questions, a different set of questions for an employee because of their age. So it is all just a sort of question of broadening your the way that you're dealing with things. The other thing I've come across is training. I think for older workers is as key as it is for younger workers. There are some nice myths. Older employees are difficult to train unless they're able to learn new skills. So no evidence to support it. Well organised, planned and coherent training helps all employees regardless of age. And employers like to get investment back in training staff, unlikely to get investment back in training staff over 55. And under 25, as they are both likely to move on in the near future. So as technology moves faster, most skills need updating frequently, so all staff need training. They're all likely to benefit, as is the organisation. Final one, performance of employees tails off as they get older. Research shows there's no deterioration in performance of employees at work at least until 70. But what does make a difference is whether older employees get the same training as younger colleagues. So I think training's absolutely key. The other thing that you'll hit as well is health benefit age restrictions. So there's some cases on PHI where schemes have been put in place which, for example, stop at the age of 55. And that's quite difficult because I have employers who like to keep an age restriction, like to have it in their contract, despite the fact that you say to them you're going to get into a lot of trouble because of that. We work with a whole wide range of employers. But for example, there's been a case about someone whose PHI membership did stop at the age of 55. Employer directly discriminated against him. They said they had, you're probably aware on discrimination you can justify if you've got a legitimate aim and your attempts are sort of proportionate to achieving that legitimate aim. So the employer said that what their legitimate aim was admitting as many employees as possible onto the PHI scheme, and it was prohibitive if they were paying high premiums for people who were over 55. But unfortunately there was no evidence that that was what they were trying to do.
So would it be better just to cap the amount that people could use?
Yeah. A couple of cases on being too old. Pretty obvious, the first one. You're old and set in your ways. I think they had for discrimination, obviously, and unfair dismissal, I should imagine. He was considered less agile than another employee. And in the second one, he was made redundant she was made redundant from her role as a receptionist for an undertaker's. We've got a theme going on here. Not one of our clients. Employer claimed the role was redundant on the basis that the new role had different and additional responsibilities. Tribunal disagreed. They said that it was basically an intention to replace Mrs. Perrin with a young, fit blonde.
Was that in the job description?
Yeah, well, interesting enough. So again, we've got a client who made the mistake of, a couple of issues, and this is where the sort of tolerance idea comes in again. First of all, praising someone's work by saying good old Sandra on an email. Then subsequently making a comment, they were looking at sort of reorganising their sort of support team, made a comment that what they needed was an Anne Hathaway type, like in The Devil Wears Prada. So Sandra, who was sort of 50, and I've anonymised the name, it's not just Sandra, who was over 50, took offence to that and is trying to claim age discrimination. So, it's just, you just have to be very, very careful. But also, I think, in some ways, slightly tolerant. So their response was, I would say good old someone, for anyone who did it. Okay, well, that's fine, but actually, nowadays, maybe that's not appropriate terminology.
It's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is a difficult one, yeah.
People have had to adapt very, very quickly. The older generation have adapted to things very quickly. I'm still saying to people in their 80s, you can't say that anymore.
Yes.
Well, why not? What's wrong with that? I've been saying it all my life. But they can't adapt
They
very
can't.
quickly, they don't want to.
No, they don't want to.
So
And they say, the whole of their workforce is 50 plus.
Yeah.
We don't discriminate, we're all 50 plus. And I said, well, that doesn't help you, unfortunately, but, it just, so, and they've actually just replaced her with someone who is 50 plus. So I said, well, that's all, all nice, but we're talking about this particular individual, what the effect was, on her, so.
I think when you say about tolerance, that's really true there. Because all the things that you were talking about, I'm thinking, but if you had the right culture, and the culture was, somebody said that, and you could sit down and have a
Talk
discussion
about it,
learn from
understand it.
tolerance.
Yeah.
Actually, it wouldn't be a problem because we all say things sometimes that we probably shouldn't without
Absolutely.
any intent at all.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting.
But that's, as I said, so I think when you're doing your equality training, it goes further than just, being aware. I think it's a tolerance side to things as well.
It's about being aware of your own bias as well.
Yes.
I know my bias is against men at a similar age to me, white middle-aged men, that I will think that they're maybe being discriminatory, whether they are or not. I will automatically go that way.
Well, then you're
More
stereotyping,
cautious,
aren't you?
yeah.
So in the US, age discrimination specifically prohibits discrimination against persons 40 years old or over. So there's no tolerance either way. It's specifically focused on the older age group. So I thought, well, that was quite interesting. But then there's some analysis that went with it. 1 in 4 workers, they did some analysis across US, UK, Canada and Ireland. 1 in 4 workers, 26% felt discriminated against over the course of their year. When asked the main reason for feelings of discrimination, more than half, 52%, cited age. And that was a survey done with people who are aged 18 or older. So, you were saying sort of age is an add-on. I think you were saying age is your top diversity training. Actually, the workforce is sort of revealing that it is a big issue. So, flexible working we've also touched on, there's talk every now and again of it being offered as standard. There's an expectation perhaps amongst the younger generation that it should be available as standard. And we've gone through the sort of, the stereotypical characteristics and what that means. And one of the impacts, of course, is also flattened hierarchies across businesses. So younger generation tend to be less respectful of hierarchical structures, and that also is a key thing to manage. It sort of goes to everything from sort of appraisal right through to sort of the mentoring, the training, and questioning whether within your organisation is a flattened hierarchical structure actually a better thing to have than the sort of traditional structure which is based upon age usually. So again, importance of capability and careful management is absolutely key, but obviously potentially different styles. I've just then got some slides on social media because we find this is a really big issue at the moment. If you are using social media to communicate, there are some advantages, there are also some big disadvantages. So I've just got a couple of slides that deal with that, which I will skip through quite quickly. The risks, I think, are the sort of more, things that you need to think about carefully. So I've got a case on at the moment with an individual whose ex-employer wants the data content of his LinkedIn. And, this is really developing case law. So not my particular case, but generally it's developing case law. So how do you as employers ensure if you're going to use this social media and perhaps more informal way of communicating, how do you ensure you keep ownership of the property that you have, of the data that's being collected? Obviously the more informal you are, the more time wasting there might be productivity might reduce. You've got risks of bullying, harassment and discrimination, and potentially it's a lot easier to do it over social media. Remember, of course, that you've got liability for anything done during the course of or associated with employment. So it's good to have some good rules in place about use of social media. Just a little case on, again, discrimination, but it's to do with racism. So this is to do with an individual who actually posted it on Facebook, so it's not at all work related. But he complained that as a result of this posting on Facebook, these racist images were circulating in the workplace. So everyone in the workplace was friends on Facebook. They were circulating the images. And there could be various vicarious liability in that situation. So be very careful that you have got proper rules in place. Then moving on to the sandwich generation, so we've also touched on those, people who are stuck between rock and a hard place, kids and parents. We all know that sort of healthcare for older generation isn't great. There's a lot more responsibility, I think, now than there used to be, and we were talking about the fact that actually we're probably going back to, multi-generational families that used to exist. Businesses are losing, people have to change their working patterns. This is a dementia example. So, of the 355,000 people of working age caring for people with dementia, 147,000 have had to reduce their work hours, or have had difficulty balancing work and caring. And more than 112,000 have had to give up their jobs to care. So it's being aware of, obviously, what it is that's pulling people and motivating people and driving their decision-making processes. So don't overlook the people who are sitting in the middle. Don't concern yourselves just with the old people and the young people. There's people in the middle who've got a lot of responsibilities. A lot of stress, typically at the peak of their career. You've got pressure at work, you've got pressure at home. You sort of, just looking around the room, there's possibly a number of us. So you leave work, you get home, you do the washing, you do the cooking, you check your parents are fine, you get to bed, you wake up in the morning, you unload the dishwasher, you get the kids ready for school, you get back to work, and it's relentless sometimes, and a lot of people are experiencing that. So again, beware discrimination by association. So one of the examples we were thinking of, don't look at the sandwich generation and think, oh, we won't bother offering them overtime hours because they've got all these caring responsibilities, they're never going to respond positively. You'll be discriminating against them if you do that. Cross-generational mentoring, we talked about already. So sharing knowledge, different perspectives, not stereotyping, but as I said, I think it's quite interesting to see some of the stereotypical characteristics. And again, flexible working as well, we've talked about. People are approaching it for different reasons. Some people want flexible working because they want to see the world. Other people want it because they're caring for their elderly relatives. You need to sort of consider, obviously, each case on its merits, and each case has to be responded to in accordance with what the legislation says. There has been talk about it becoming a day one right. That's what the Labour government, the prospective Labour government, offered. Obviously, that's not going to be in for a little while yet. Potential pitfalls, carefully worded job adverts. Well, we all love what HMRC are doing in terms of sort of I don't know what you do in your adverts, but your forms are great. And again, there's loads of guidance on the ACAS and also on the Equality and Human Rights Commission paperwork on carefully worded. So, it's not got to do with sort of longevity of career, it's career experience. You don't ask someone how many years have you managed before you ask them what their management experience is. Consistent interview questions, and I think quite a lot of that comes out in this idea of sort of the videoing idea, the predetermined questions, but so just be very careful. Obviously, you want to have, hopefully, an interview where you're face-to-face, that you don't go down the line of sort of discriminatory questioning. Discussing career ambitions with everyone at appraisal. Just thinking about appraisals, in our workplace, we appraise every month. We have one-to-ones every month, informal one-to-ones. And I can't emphasise how great those are if people don't do them. I think annual appraisals are appalling. Because if you do it monthly, you've got an opportunity every single month to say to someone, either yes, you're doing it great, let's have more of it, or you're almost doing it great, and let's have a little bit more. And so, as an organisation, I think it's a really valuable opportunity to feed back before the moment's forgotten. And it's much less formal, isn't it? I mean, I'm looking at Anna because she goes through it as well. So we all, no matter what level we're, whether we're in the support team, whether we're the lawyers or sitting on the HR side, everyone goes through the same thing. I don't have my career ambitions discussed every time we go to an appraisal. So relevant training for all, don't overlook mature workers. Don't assume anyone needs special treatment. So going back to the I'm not going to offer them overtime, or I'll make sure there's a special seat available for them. Just don't make assumptions. So capability process, not retirement discussions. And I've said watch water cooler conversations. There was a comment recently by, I eventually found it, I can't remember who it was by now. But anyway, the point was, water cooler conversations are the informal conversations that go on in the workplace. And if they are all, say, football associated, which was what the particular commentary was about on Radio 4, then that's discriminatory potentially against females, which caused a great backlash because I know. Well, that was the whole, exactly. So there was a great backlash about that. But just be mindful of what's going on in your workplace. Is it always the young ones who are gathered around the coffee station? And the older ones are carrying on with the work, and is that exclusive, and are they excluding people by doing that? So just be aware of what's going on, and we think diversity training is part of induction as well. So and again, I think this goes to the tolerance and awareness side of things.